Today we're doing more of a long-term review of the Sigma FP, and I want to give you my thoughts on this camera after using it for the last 3 years. Now, if you're familiar with the channel, you know that I'm no stranger to the Sigma FP and have damn near built my channel around this camera. But with the camera being a little bit over 4 years old, the question does become of, would I still recommend this camera in 2023 going into 2024? And so we're going to try to answer that question here today. And to help answer that question, I'm going to give you guys 10 reasons why I typically choose this camera over other cameras when I'm going to film or photograph a project. So starting off, the first thing I want to mention is the overall image quality of this camera. The image that comes from this camera has always been something I've gravitated to. Even with recently purchasing the Lumix S5 IIX, while I do love the image coming from that camera, the image coming out of the Sigma FP has been something that has inspired me to create more content. And honestly, that's one of the most valuable things when you are trying to choose the right camera for you. Now, that being said, I want to emphasize the right camera for you. This camera does max out at 30 frames per second in 4K, which for some people is an immediate disqualification because maybe you need higher frame rates or you want a higher resolution option. Now, for me, I shoot everything primarily in 4K 24 frames per second, which this camera does have a true 24 frames per second, and that's something I really do appreciate about it. And with that, you do also get an uncompromised, uncompressed 12-bit cinema DNG raw image. And so with that, if you're willing to spend the time color grading the Sigma FP image, you really start to get an image that is truly inspiring. And again, it has inspired me to create more content. And a lot of times that's the most important thing and one of the biggest reasons why I choose the Sigma FP. But I mentioned I have 10 reasons and I currently have like 20 minutes left on this card, so we're going to keep things going. So the next reason why I love and choose the Sigma FP is the implementation of Ezone. This is something that recently came to the Sigma FP with the last firmware update. And if you're unfamiliar with Ezone, it's basically false color, but instead of reading the exposure in IRE percentages, it does read it in stops of light. And so it's a little bit easier to see your exposure for when you're underexposed or overexposed. And so I've really enjoyed my time with Ezone, and the fact that it is built into the FP is really awesome. Now, a negative here is I do wish that there is an option to use Ezone while you're recording. For certain projects, there are times where we're doing longer takes and exposure does change. And so I would like to use Ezone while recording. That is one thing that maybe I would like to see in a future firmware update. The next reason why I choose to shoot with the Sigma FP is the ability to use dual frame guides. Right now, I'm using a 2:1 aspect ratio frame guide and a 9:16 aspect ratio frame guide. And that allows me to shoot for both horizontal and vertical video within the same shot. So it's a smaller feature, but one reason why I typically choose the Sigma FP for various projects. Now, if you are a photographer watching this video, one, I'm going to go ahead and apologize that my photography skills are very subpar. But that being said, if you happen to be a photographer watching this video, one thing I really do like about the FP is the 21:9 aspect ratio. This is very similar to like an X-Pan aspect ratio. It's not quite X-Pan, and it doesn't stitch the images side by side for a true wide angle field of view, but it does allow for you to get something a little bit more unique in those scenarios where you are photographing in a little bit more of a wide angle field of view. Now, keeping with photography, another reason why I typically choose the Sigma FP for various projects is because of its amazing built-in monochrome profile. There's a lot of times where I actually shoot monochrome for video, knowing I'm going to color grade in post. It does somehow help me with exposure and seeing the contrast of the image. If you want that workflow, it's a weird workflow, but let me know in the comments below. Maybe I'll make a video about it. But with both photography and videography, the monochrome profile is one that if you just want a built-in black and white image out of camera, the Sigma FP offers a really good monochrome profile. Now, moving on, the next reason why I typically choose the FP for projects is because of its amazing focus assist tools. Both focus peaking and focus magnification are excellent with this camera. I do wish that the focus magnification was available when you are recording, and that's something I would like to see from the camera in a future firmware update, is the ability to punch in on the image while you're recording. But with that said, I have come to love the focus magnification from the FP. Now, along the lines of focus magnification and focus peaking, talking about monitoring your image, one of the reasons why I also choose the FP is simply the EVF 11. This is one of my favorite EVFs in the market. And honestly, one of the reasons why I choose the Sigma FP for certain projects is coming down to the EVF11, because I do like that flexibility of being able to tilt the EVF to hold the camera a little bit differently, again, for more stable footage. Now, talking about the EVF and maybe some of the physical features of the camera, one of the reasons why I choose the FP just comes down to the size of the camera. And don't get me wrong, it's not just because it's the smallest full frame camera on the market, it's because this camera is as close to a cube camera without being a cube camera. I love my rig setup that I have right now for the Sigma FP, which is kind of my Red Komodo inspired rig setup. And if you want to see more about my rig build, I'll leave that video in the description below. But to that point, I did the same rig build with the S5 IIX, and the rig was just so much more tall than it is with the Sigma FP. The fact that you don't have the EVF, the fact that you have this small form factor, even when I'm rigging up this camera, it's just way more comfortable. And so that's one thing I really do appreciate about the FP is the overall size. Now, one of the things I've come to appreciate about the FP is the startup time. This camera, almost as soon as you turn it on, is ready to shoot, and I love it for that. And so that's one thing I've come to really appreciate about the FP is the overall start time. Now, before I list the last reason why I choose the Sigma FP, I do want to list off some bullet point items that I would like to see improved with this camera, maybe in a future firmware update. So the first thing I want to mention is a open gate option. Open gate is becoming more and more accessible with cameras at this price point, and so I'd really like to see some sort of open gate option with the FP. The next bullet point, I'm going to kind of combine two things because I've already mentioned them. One is false color or Ezone while you're recording with the camera, and then also focus magnification while you're recording. I would love to see that in a future firmware update. The next thing is 4K DCI to an SSD. I love 4K DCI. I love using 4K DCI, but I don't always want to use an external recorder. And so having the ability to use 4K DCI and shoot it to an SSD would be something I would love and appreciate if it came to the FP. And along those same lines, I would love to see 4K at least 48 frames per second. I don't need 60, I don't need 120. A good 4K 48 would be just icing on the cake. And so please, future firmware updates, please include one of those items. If you include like one, maybe two, I'd be happy. And that brings me to the last thing I want to mention of why I choose the Sigma FP, and really is kind of applicable because the last reason why I choose this camera is the continued support from Sigma. We're still getting firmware updates that make game-changing features. This past year, we got Ezone, we got camera to cloud, which is another reason why you may want to choose the camera. And I don't personally use it, so I'm not using it in my list here, but the fact that we're getting these game-changing features 4 years later is a testament to how much Sigma backs this camera. And so to answer your question of would I still recommend this camera in 2023 going into 2024, I personally think that if you're someone that values image quality over specs, that if you're wanting to get into a raw workflow on a budget, this is absolutely a camera to check out. And so to answer your question of would I still recommend this camera, I'm going to give you an absolute hell yes, I would recommend this camera. And so if you are someone that is on a budget looking to get into a raw workflow, wanting that full frame 4K 12-bit cinema DNG image, wanting that more organic, more filmic image, then I would absolutely recommend and say you should check out the Sigma FP in 2023 going into 2024. And so that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, or I hope it was helpful to kind of get some more information about the FP. If you do have any additional questions about this camera, let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for joining. Go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Peace.